Keys to the book of 1 Kings. It has 22 chapters, 816 verses. I don't know if this is meaningful to you, but I found it fascinating that 1 Kings has fewer chapters than 2 Samuel or 2 Kings. It has fewer chapters, but it has more verses. So obviously the chapters are longer. Who really cares? I don't know, but it's interesting to me. It's named Kings because the first word of 1 Kings 1:1 is, "Now King David was." Now, there's a tradition in Hebrew scriptures that you name the book after the first word or words of the book. They do that for the Pentateuch, for Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So it's in Hebrew, of course, but the Hebrew title for the book of Genesis is "In the Beginning." And they name it after that. So kind of adopting this pattern, that's how this book got the name Kings. Now, it was originally joined together with 2 Kings. They were originally one work. Why were they divided into 1 and 2 Kings? Well, we don't know exactly why. Probably because it fit on a scroll better. Hebrew writing is much more compact than Greek writing. Greek writing is bigger because they just have a bigger vocabulary, and the grammar makes it necessary to describe things in a bigger way. So it could be that when it transitioned from Hebrew writing to Greek writing in translation, that they separated it into two books to fit on two scrolls better. That's a possibility. We don't exactly know beyond that. The period it covers is somewhere around 130 to 140 years. Okay? That's the period of time that we're dealing with. So in the beginning of 1 Kings, who's the king? David is the king. Okay? Who's the king at the end of 1 Kings? There's two of them. Yeah, it's kind of a trick question. And I can't tell you off the top of my head who they are. It would be the son of Ahab, Ahaziah. And then who is it in Judah? Jehoshaphat? Okay, so two guys that we can hardly remember their names. So notice this contract here. At the beginning of 1 Kings, David is old, and Israel has had a united monarchy for something like 70 years. I don't know exactly how long King Saul reigned. Do we remember that?
40 years.
Saul, not David. Saul reigned 40 years? I'm looking for some nodding. Did Saul reign 40 years? We don't really know, do we? I think we're guesstimating somewhere between 20 and 40 years. So for somewhere between 20 and let's say for somewhere between 60 and 70 years, Israel had one king, either Saul and then succeeding him David, and now David was close to death. And it was time for the first time in Israel for the throne to pass on to the son of the king. The first king of Israel was Saul. Did the throne pass to Saul's son? No. The second king of Israel was? Did the throne pass to David's son? Yes. So you see, this is kind of a big deal. It's a big thing for the hereditary monarchy to come into being, to come into order. And that's what happens at the beginning. That's at the beginning of 1 Kings. At the end of 2 Kings, or 1 Kings, what a mess. At the end of 1 Kings, the 12 tribes of Israel are divided into two different kingdoms, and you've had a terrible civil war. So you go from the glory of King David to the mess of a divided kingdom at the end of 1. So in that sense, you would say it's a pretty sad story, all in all, that happens in 1 Kings. So keep that in mind. It tells the story of Solomon's reign. That's the first half of the book. And then it tells the story of the first 100 years of the divided kingdom. One thing to consider about this is that 1 Kings gives us what we might call a spiritual history of the kings of Israel. It's not necessarily a political or economic history. Even though it mentions politics, even though it mentions economics, there are substantial things that happen politically and economically that are never really mentioned in 1 Kings. What do I mean by that? Well, a very good example of this is the reign of Omri. We know from secular history, from archaeology, from writings in other places, and from hints in the scriptures, we know that Omri had an awesome reign. Omri had a very successful reign in the northern kingdom of Israel, politically, economically, militarily. I mean, the guy really had it together. You know how much attention he gets in the book of 1 Kings? 8 verses. 8 verses. Why? Because spiritually speaking, he was a zero. So understand this. The book of 1 Kings and 2 Kings along with it, it's more a spiritual history than it is focusing on political things or economic developments. You could say that the book of 1 Kings emphasizes God's righteous judgment on idolatry and immorality. Think about it. You're going to see this as a repeated theme in 1 Kings and 2 Kings. If you were to give a key word to the book of 1 Kings, the key word I would choose is the word division. Division. This is the epic event that happens in the book of 1 Kings. Key verses, let's take a look at those. 1 Kings chapter 9, 4 and 5, and then 11. First of all, 1 Kings 9, 4 and 5. This is God's promise to Solomon. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according that all I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, as I promised David, your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. This promise that God gave to David was fulfilled wonderfully by David. It was not fulfilled by Solomon very well. By the way, what's kind of mind-blowing, and we'll talk about this more with the life of Solomon. How many wives did Solomon have? How many concubines did Solomon have? 300. 700 wives, 300 concubines. How many sons of Solomon do we know of by name? One. Now, does the Bible say he only had one son? No, it doesn't say that. But it only identifies one son of Solomon. Now, Solomon, he very well could have had hundreds of sons, but we're never told anything about them. Why? Because God wanted you to see that the blessing of God was not on Solomon. And it's only going to tell you about one son that he ever had. And that son was a fool. His one son was a fool who lost the kingdom, essentially, or divided it. So Solomon didn't really fulfill this, but this was a pivotal thing. One of the great what-if questions of biblical history is this. What if Solomon had been as faithful to God as his father David was? Again, we're not talking about sinless perfection. Was David sinlessly perfect? No way. But even in David's failures, he had a heart after God, which is something that Solomon seemed to lose, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next scripture, take a look at 1 Kings 11:11. Therefore, the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. The specific servant that he had in mind here was a man named Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a guy who was a captain under Solomon and in his army. And as it turns out, Jeroboam will be the first king of the 10 northern tribes, the kingdom of Israel, and Solomon's throne will continue in the kingdom of Judah. So you see here the promise made in chapter 9. You see the promise unfulfilled in chapter 11. And it's the great tragedy of the book of 1 Kings. What's our next one here? Let's go back one other thing here. The key chapter, I think, would be 1 Kings chapter 12. Maybe if we have time this afternoon, I don't know if we will or we won't, But if we have time, maybe we'll just do a quick walk through 1 Kings chapter 12. But let me just tell you what happens in 1 Kings chapter 12. That's when the tribes divide. That's when there's a split, and it's the beginning of what we call the divided kingdom. So I just want everybody to have this in mind. You should be able to just sit down and recite this. You should be able to just recite, to say back, Israel came out of Egypt. They were in the land under Joshua. They had 400 years under the period of the judges. Their first king was Saul. Their second king was David. The third king was Solomon. But Solomon was ungodly, and God's blessing was especially not upon his son, Rehoboam. And so in the days of Rehoboam, the 12 tribes of Israel divided into two kingdoms, a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah. Is that complicated? Could everybody pretty much understand that and recite that? And not because you memorize it, because you understand it. I mean, that's just kind of a walkthrough of the history up to this point. So, let's go on here. Who wrote the book of 1 Kings? Who wrote it? Samuel? No, Samuel's been dead for a long time. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Why do you say Jeremiah? Yeah, because it says it right there. No, the actual answer to who wrote it is? God. Okay, yeah, okay, God. I mean God. Human author. Who's the human author of 1 Kings? We don't know. We don't know. Now, there's guesses. Who does Jewish tradition say is the author? Can you guys read the screen behind me? I spent a lot of time preparing these slides. I bet that you take a look at there. It must have taken me 20 minutes to type in the name Jeremiah. All right, this is the guy that Jewish tradition says it is. So we don't know who the author of the book was. However, Jewish tradition says that it's Jeremiah. Was it Jeremiah? I'll give you a big fat maybe. It could have been. Why? Well, let's take a look at a few of the characteristics. First of all, there are interesting similarities between 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah chapters 39 and 52. There's several paragraphs that seem to be about the same. So that's kind of interesting, and that kind of gives maybe a common link between the two. Here's something else to consider. Why would we say that we know that maybe Jeremiah wrote 1 Kings because a passage in 2 Kings is similar to a couple chapters in Jeremiah? Why is that? Why doesn't that just prove that he wrote 2 Kings?
Similar writing style?
Exactly so. Thank you, Kenny. Because they used to be one book, right? So whoever wrote 1 Kings is the same. That's what you should have said. When I said who wrote 1 Kings, you should have said the guy who wrote 2 Kings. But the problem is we don't know who that guy is. But, okay, it could be Jeremiah because of that link. Here's another indication. The repetition of the phrase, to this day, as in 1 Kings 8:8 and 12:19, indicates authorship in Jeremiah's time before the Babylonian captivity. In other words, we do know this, from the use of that phrase, to this day, it's an indication that the book was written before the Babylonians came and conquered the kingdom of Judah. Okay, well that would put it within Jeremiah's time. Maybe he did it. The other thing that we emphasize is that it emphasizes, the book does, God's righteous judgment on idolatry and immorality. Well, isn't that something that Jeremiah would be interested in emphasizing? You could see why a guy like Jeremiah might not care all that much about the reign of Omri. Who cares? But about the aspects relating to idolatry and immorality, he's very concerned about those. So that fits in with a authorship from Jeremiah. We also have the idea that in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, there are many source books mentioned. What do I mean? Well, when you take a look at these books, you'll see that many times it says, as it is written in the books of the Acts of Solomon. Does it not say in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Does it not say in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? As it is written in the book of Nathan the prophet. You see what I'm saying? There were written records that Jeremiah or somebody like him under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, took what was in those written records and explained and expounded upon it, and was used by God to give us what we have today. Now, let me ask you a question. Because the Bible mentions, for example, the book of the Acts of Solomon. Does anybody have the book of the Acts of Solomon in their Bible? Is that in anybody's Bible? No? Yannick, is that in the German Bible? Yeah, no. Dr. Luther would not allow that. He would not allow that. Okay, if we don't have the book of the Acts of Solomon, does that mean that our Bibles are incomplete? Yes or no? No? Okay, well, it's not enough to say no. You have to explain why no.
Just that they haven't been found.
So if we found the book of the Acts of Solomon, we could say that we know for sure that it's inspired by God the way that the rest of the scriptures are? No. Well, then aren't our Bibles incomplete?
No.
Why not?
Because they're books that God chose to have there.
Yeah, but it mentions other books. Why aren't those books included?
Because it didn't meet the standard for the canonization of to be included.
Yeah, but the Bible mentions those books.
I think it's incomplete.
Okay, he thinks it's incomplete. All right? Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
Well, wouldn't it fall in the category like the Apocrypha? You've got those kinds of books that...
Yeah, it could be Apocrypha. Look, let me just give you the principle. Just because the Bible mentions a book doesn't mean that it belongs in Holy Scripture. Why would we think so? Paul, on Mount, where was he? On Mars Hill. Paul on Mars Hill mentions two Greek poets, Euripides and somebody else, some other ancient poet. Does that mean that everything that those ancient Greek poets wrote belongs in the New Testament? No. Just because a biblical author under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit quotes another author, it doesn't mean that everything that those authors wrote belongs in the Holy Scriptures. Not at all. So nobody should think that just because the Bible quotes a book that we may or may not have, it doesn't mean that everything in the book belongs in our Bible. Okay? Is that clear? But what it does lead us to believe is that when Jeremiah or somebody else got down to the work of compiling and making the book of 1 Kings, they used many of these books as kind of source documents, and they did it all under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Any question on that? So who wrote the book of 1 Kings? The guy who wrote 2 Kings. Who wrote 2 Kings? The guy who wrote 1 Kings. That's, yeah. What's that? Who wrote? Who? We don't know. Who is a likely candidate? Jeremiah. Okay, I think that's what we end with. All right? I think you guys got that. Book of 1 Kings, a summary. Here we go. 1 Kings begins with the glorious reign of Solomon, the splendor of his kingdom, the building of the temple, and his disappointing later years. The book then describes 1,000 years of a divided kingdom, where the 12 tribes of Israel are split into a northern and a southern kingdoms, each mostly disobedient. Okay? That's how I would give a summary of the book of 1 Kings. Yes, I see a question back there.
Is it 1,000? Is it 1,000 or 100?
Did I say 100? Did I say 1,000? Okay, I meant 100. Describes 100 years of a divided kingdom where the 12 tribes of Israel are split into a northern and a southern kingdoms, into northern and southern kingdoms, each mostly disobedient. Okay, any questions about that description? Does anybody would challenge that description? Okay, next. We're moving through this tonight. You guys want to get this class over. Okay, let's think a little bit about King Solomon, because King Solomon is one of the dominant figures in the book of 1 Kings. First of all, Solomon built the temple. How amazing is that? Let me take a look at my slides. So I have, okay. Let's talk about the temple for a little bit. Solomon built the temple. Is that the temple?
No. Oh, yes. But
No? How do you know? Did you ever see the temple? All right. So what is that? That's up on the PowerPoint slide. It's the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. But you know what? In a way, this is the temple in two ways. First of all, it was the temple before there was a temple. Secondly, it became the prototype for the temple. When the temple was built, it had a courtyard. When the temple was built, it had an altar. When the temple was built, it had a laver for washing. When the temple was built, it had a building where you met with God with pillars on the front and two rooms, one larger, one smaller, one the holy place, the other the Holy of Holies. What I'm just trying to establish is that the principle of the temple is entirely based upon the tabernacle. The temple was a permanent tabernacle. The tabernacle was a portable temple. So both of them connect to each other. But you're right, this is not the temple, this is the tabernacle. Oh my. Okay, next. Here is an artist's depiction of Solomon's temple. You know, we're given something in the way of dimensions and such. We don't know exactly, but this is probably a pretty good understanding of what it looked like. You see, first of all, that you have, what's this? The altar, that's right. What's this? Yeah, that's the laver where ceremonial washings would happen. Okay? This is the temple building itself, the temple proper, and it's divided into two rooms. The back room would be the Holy of Holies, and in this would be the holy place. And then it mentions two notable bronze pillars. Boaz and Joachim, I think, were the two names of the pillars. They each had names, and they were set up at the entrance of the temple. So that's one depiction. Here's another depiction of the temple. This one was taken off of a Freemason website, so I don't know so much about it, but I thought it was a nice picture. It does mention that Solomon's laver rested upon oxen, and so people think that it was some kind of sculpture like this, perhaps. Some people might say, well, how could you use the water in something like that if it's up so high? They might have had faucets and spigots that led out from it from the base. This is supposed to represent the altar of sacrifice. Here are the pillars that we spoke about. And I want you to notice that the general construction of the temple in these two artist depictions is pretty much the same. Do you notice the same general sense of a smaller second story built upon a larger first story, and then kind of this opening room? So you kind of have this and this have the same basic idea behind them. Okay, another depiction of Solomon's temple goes something like this. You have the porch, you have the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, you have the altar, you have the molten sea there built on the oxen. Here you have lavers and bases, again, for more ceremonial washings. Here you have the interior with the holy place in the front, the Holy of Holies in the back. So, that's it. Solomon's great work was to build this temple. And you know what I find fascinating about this? And you really don't get to this. We'll talk about it more when we get to Chronicles. Who first had the idea to build the temple? David. What did God say to David when David wanted to build the temple? Pardon me? He said what? No. Did God say anything else to him?
Because you have unclean hands.
Right. Did God say anything else to David at that time?
He said, but I'll build you a house.
I'll build you a house. Okay? So David, you want to build me a house? No, thank you, but I'll build you a house. And he established what we call the Davidic covenant, that the Messianic line would come from David. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, David basically said in response, and again, we'll get into this in 1 Chronicles, but I'm just touching on it because we're talking about the building of the temple. David essentially said to this, well, God, you said that I couldn't build the temple, but you didn't say that I couldn't buy the land. You didn't say that I couldn't assemble all the materials. You didn't say that I could have the architects do all the drawings. You didn't say that I could arrange for all the contractors and work to do it, blah, blah, blah. You didn't say that I could fund it with all the money. There's a real sense in which this was David's temple. Solomon just put the pieces together. David assembled all the pieces. David even planned out the schedule for the priests to operate in the temple. I mean, David did so much planning and so much execution for that temple that it was really awesome, but he obeyed God and did not do the one thing God told him not to do, and that was build the temple. So, anyway, I think that's interesting. Oh, here's kind of the idea, size comparison of the inner court. Here's an American football field, and here's that. So what? That would go out to about the 60-yard line on an American football field. So not a huge area for the temple. It wasn't a huge building. I mean, I don't want to act like it was tiny, but its greatness was not in its size. Oh, here's one more thing of Solomon's temple. Outside, you have the court of the women. Then you have storage areas, courts of the Israelites. I don't know where this guy gets off on this. They know what all the compartments are for. I don't know how you would guess that. I mean, whatever. All right, let's go back to this. Not only did Solomon build the temple, but Solomon was also famous for his wisdom and for his science. What do I mean by that? Well, everybody knows this wisdom of Solomon. What in the Bible is the ultimate example of Solomon's wisdom? Well, first of all, let's hear the description of Solomon's wisdom. 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled all the wisdom of all the men of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men. Then Ethon the Ezrahite, from Haman, Chalcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Also he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And the men of all nations, from all over the kings of the earth, who had heard his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. I mean, you have to admit, that all is pretty impressive on Solomon's watch here. He was a man who had incredible wisdom. And the Bible gives us a story that describes the brilliance of Solomon's wisdom. Does anybody recall what that story is? Of course you do, because you just read it last week. What's the story that tells us all about, somebody explain to me, tell me the story that explains the brilliance of Solomon's wisdom.
Solomon and the ladies with the child.
Do tell, I've never heard this story before. Tell me the story. Tell everybody this story.
They're debating over
Who's they?
There's two women.
Two women.
They're,
Any particular kind of women?
okay, I didn't know that.
That's right.
Okay,
No,
so-
you didn't remember because you read the text. You just forgot it. So anyway, okay, yeah.
So they go to King Solomon. And
What's the argument? I don't get what the argument is. Why do they need to go to kill? Well, why would they fight over the child?
Because one of them says that it's hers, and the other one says that it's hers.
Well, but why was that even a fight? Oh, are you going to fill in just a little bit here? Isaac, go ahead.
Because one wife or one lady slept with her baby and she covered it and suffocated and it died. And
Oh.
switched out the babies. And when
So originally, there were two ladies and two babies. But one of the babies died. But one was left alive. And both women claimed the alive baby. Is that the story you're talking about?
Right.
Okay, so what happens?
So they bring the baby before the king, and he tells
Which king?
Solomon.
Okay, Solomon, okay.
And he tells them basically, whoever, it's basically they end up deciding that whoever's child it was, that they would split it in half. And he said, if you guys can split it in half, and he figured out whose child it was because the lady whose actual child it was didn't want the child.
So Solomon says something to this effect. I don't know whose baby this is.
Right.
I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's split them down the middle. You can have each half.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did the women react when Solomon said that? Isaac, what?
one lady,
Well, one lady said what?
one lady said, "Let the baby live and give to the other lady."
Yeah.
One woman said, don't cut the baby in half. What did the other woman say?
This is like if neither of us can have the baby, let it be cut in half.
Yeah, the other one said, well, fine. I'll take half. So how did Solomon know which woman was the true
No
mother?
one who really had a child would ever want to see that child killed just for
Ah.
benefit.
He also showed that other mother was a cold-blooded woman. I'll tell you that. unfit to be a mother.
Right.
Unfit to be a mother. So that famous story about splitting the baby in two. I mean, you got to admit, you listen to that story and you go, that's smart. That's really wise. That shows an understanding of human nature. That shows a wisdom about how things work in this world. Man, that was really smart, Solomon, for you to do that. And that's the whole point of the story, to show us how wise Solomon was and how blown away we should be at his wisdom. So he had all this. Now, this is what I want you to notice. Solomon wasn't just wise in the sense that, he could speak in fortune cookies and that kind of stuff. No, Solomon was smart when it came to science. Notice this. He spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, and of creeping things, and of fish. In other words, the guy was like a botanist, like a biologist, like a botanist. I mean, he knew science, he knew wisdom. He was a very, very smart man. So, he was very famous for his wisdom and his science. The other thing you would say about Solomon is that he led Israel into its period of greatest security, and I'm speaking like militarily so, and greatest prosperity. There's hardly any war-making described in Solomon's reign. I won't say none, but hardly any. I mean, he was the man of peace. And actually, that's what God intended for Solomon, that he be a man of peace, and that a man of peace would build the temple. By the way, how do you say peace in Hebrew? Shalom. Doesn't the name kind of sound like that? Is it a derivative, Deborah? I never thought about that. But at least it's reminiscent. It's reminiscent, even if it's not a derivative. Okay, so let's talk about this great period of security and prosperity. Check this out, chapter 4, verse 20. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all kingdoms, from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now check this out. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. What a fatso! That guy ate that every day? Come on, it's a little Bible humor here. Boy, this is a tough room. Is this microphone on? Oh, it wasn't just for Solomon?
I think it was for Solomon.
Oh, who was it for?
Well, I think at that time there were 12 different people with business with food that they would bring on a monthly basis.
Sure, they did that. They did the 12 different things. But who ate all this food? This was an enormous amount of food.
His kids.
Yeah, number one, his wives and kids. I mean, that was a lot of mouths to feed, don't you think? But could you imagine what it was like at Solomon's place? It was like the all-you-can-eat buffet every day of the week. People go in there and there's just all this buffet set out. You just go there and everybody, they spend time at the salad bar and then they go on to the next thing. And then they go over, I think I'm going to have some of the roebuck today. I'll have 100 sheep. 100 sheep a day. But again, when you've got, how many kids did those 1,000 wives have, Let's say they had 2 each. That's 3,000 people to feed. 3,000 people. So you can see where the food went. Okay, going on here now. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Tipshah even to Gaza, namely over all the kings on this side of the river. And he had peace on every side all around him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and under his fig tree, as from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Peace on every side. He was the man of peace. Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to contrast in your mind David and Solomon. Was Solomon a warrior like David? No. Think about David. David was a cold-blooded killer. I mean, he was also the sweet psalmist of Israel, but David knew what it was like to slit a man's throat and have him die in your arms. I mean, the dude was like a special forces ninja. He was amazing. Now, check this out. Check this out with David. All of that, yet David's reign was constant fighting. Solomon, I'm not saying he's like a pretty boy, but he was not Mr. Special Forces at all, at all. What I'm trying to say is that the peace that Solomon enjoyed was provided for him by David. David made the peace that Solomon enjoyed. David made the covenant with God that Solomon benefited by. David arranged everything for the temple that Solomon gets the credit for. David really was the greatness of Solomon. We just don't often think of it like that. Now, one other thing I want you to understand, where it says the river, over and over again. What river is it talking about? The Mississippi? The Euphrates. Okay, to the river. We'll take a look at this when we take a look at maps a little bit later. Hello, Anne. Welcome. All right, let's take a look at another verse here. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 21, 27. Okay, I want you to think about this. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as sycamore trees which are in the lowland. Incredible wealth in the days of Solomon. This was Israel at its height. So much so that what happens when the Queen of Sheba visits Solomon? What chapter is that? That's chapter 10, isn't it? Isn't that chapter 10? You guys read through each chapter and wrote a one or two sentence thing. Chapter 10? Okay, so Queen of Sheba comes to, what do we know about the Queen of Sheba? She was a queen, okay? And she was from Sheba, okay? Most people think like either Arabia area or Ethiopia area. There's debate about that. So she's royal. Royal people are used to fancy stuff. Okay, look, we got some china at our house. It comes from Sweden. Some friends of Inglo's family made it for her. I really dig it. I think it's super classy. It's fine porcelain. It's got this detail, embossing around the edges. It's got a nice, it's Swedish, it's kind of subtle. It's not gaudy, but it's just got this nice little gold thing around it. I mean, I really dig our china. I think it's really cool china. And, to me, it's like we put it out and we're impressing somebody. I don't expect the Queen of England to come over our house and be impressed by our china. It's like, I feed my dogs on better plates than this, she would say. Royalty is just used to a certain standard. She was a queen, and she came to Solomon's Jerusalem. And what did she say when she came to Solomon's Jerusalem? You guys read it. You read the whole book of 1 Kings. Yeah, I want to see the splendor of your kingdom. I want to see how wise you are. I want to see it all. And then what was her reaction when she said? She was overwhelmed. She said, the half of it wasn't told to me. I'm a queen, and I know what royal things are like. And this is so much greater than I ever imagined. And then what did she do? She said, surely your God is the Lord. Yahweh is God. And this was like the ultimate for Israel. That they would be so obedient and so blessed by God that the surrounding nations would take a look at them and just go, whoa, this is amazing. Yahweh is God. No people could be so blessed as this unless Yahweh was with them. I can't even believe it. The fact that the Queen of Sheba was absolutely dumbstruck at the glory of Solomon's kingdom tells you something. It shows you how high God lifted him up. That kingdom was utterly blessed. And I think it is, in Israel's history, the epitome, the top of God saying, This is what I will do with an obedient Israel. That's all up until chapter 10. Now, what's sad about it? Chapter 11, the wheels come off. But up till chapter 10, it's pretty amazing. Okay, what's next? Well, Solomon also wrote 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. No wonder he was so rich. He got all the royalty credits from all those songs that were hit songs in Israel. So he was a songwriter, 3,000 proverbs, 105 songs. That's in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 32. Nevertheless, given all of that, he was the stupidest wise man ever. What do I mean by that? Anybody want to explain to me what I mean by Solomon being the stupidest wise man ever? How did he disobey God? Rory, how did he disobey God?
Hey, you knew my name.
That's right. I can read.
He went right against what the Lord told him or Lord told Israel in Joshua chapter 6, talking about don't go back to Egypt ever for anything. And he's going back and getting horses.
He went back to Egypt for horses. That's right.
And then,
But it also says in Deuteronomy that they shouldn't multiply horses to themselves.
right. And
So he did that too.
And then he was talking about a king only having one wife, and he had just about 1,000. So
Yeah, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And chapter 11 will show you that his heart was turned away from God. How was Solomon's heart turned away from God? The text tells you. You guys read it. You tell me. His wives turned his heart away from God. Now, I want you to think about this. And to me, this is so sobering as a life lesson. Sex and romance have the power, have the potential to make the wisest man on the face of the earth stupid. And then who do we think we are? I mean, really, are you smarter than Solomon? Are you wiser than Solomon? But you know what? You can avoid the error that Solomon fell into by not making yourself susceptible to the dangers and the disobediences when it comes to sex and romance. But isn't that just kind of scary? What a powerful force that is? Sex and romance could make the wisest man in the world act like a complete idiot. I think of Solomon with one of his beautiful foreign wives right next to him saying, let's go offer to, Chemosh. Let's go offer to Baal. Come on, Solomon, come on. And he falls for it. And again, it just shows us that there is a power to human sexuality and to the romantic impulse that we need to be very cautious of. And we can't go into such things arrogantly thinking, man, I got this. I know this tripped up Solomon, but, I'm smarter than him. What are you talking about? No, it should just make us think, whoa, the potential for not just disobedience, the potential for destruction does this. Listen, I've heard preachers preach stories about Solomon's life, and they love to give it a happy ending somehow. Oh, he came back to the Lord. Oh, Ecclesiastes is his repentance. Let me just tell you something, maybe, but there is no evidence in the biblical text of it. The Bible wants you, just like the Bible wants you to think that Solomon only had one son, even though he probably had hundreds, but it wants you to think he only had one son because it only mentions one. So I think the Bible deliberately leaves Solomon in this despair of not turning back. Maybe he did turn back, but I don't think God wanted us to know it because he wanted us to go, whoa. Look what can happen to the wisest man ever, ever. And it was these foreign women that led his heart astray. That's why I like to call Solomon the stupidest wise man ever. And if I could preach a little bit more, maybe I should just say this to the men. Okay, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
The wife in Song of Solomon, is that his first wife? Someone said that's his first
Ooh, now that's a very good question. And it's a little hard to identify. I think so. The Song of Solomon seems to describe a love that is so pure and so beautiful and so powerful that would seem to be his first wife, his first love, his first real love.
Not the Egyptian princess.
No, but here's what I wonder. This is how I kind of personally think how it goes with the Song of Solomon. He wrote it with the wisdom of knowing the bitterness of love and romance gone wrong, but remembering the goodness and the purity of his first love.
So he wrote it after.
Yeah, but in light of the first. He's describing the first. That's kind of how I think he wrote it. I can't be certain of it, but that's kind of my take on it. What was I talking about? Okay, here, to the men. You ladies can just zone out for a moment. Look, men, I think the story of Solomon says something else very, very powerful to us as men, and this is it. If one woman isn't enough for you, then 1,000 won't be enough. I mean, think about how, grotesque Solomon was to want to have 700 wives and 300 concubines. Who has the time? Who has time for 700 mothers-in-law? You know, I mean, it's you go on and on about this. It's crazy, is what I'm trying to say. But here's the point. If one woman isn't enough for you, 1,000 won't be enough. Because the problem isn't with the one woman, the problem's with you. You're the one. So you just think, no, it's just not this one. It needs to be another one. Another one, that would be it. That would fix it for me. No. If one's not enough for you, 1,000 won't be enough. And Solomon shows that very, very powerfully. All right, here's another thing that's kind of tantalizing about Solomon. The book of Revelation describes a man associated with the number 666. Who is that man, Ann Porter?
Solomon.
No, in the book of Revelation. What man in the book of Revelation is associated with the number 666? The Antichrist, the beast. It is the number of his name. Do you realize that the number 666 only appears one other place in the entire Bible? And it's associated with Solomon. Isn't that kind of freaky? Take a look at this. The weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. That was Solomon's paycheck. He got his paycheck every year, 666 talents of gold. First of all, which I take it is an enormous amount of money. But isn't it interesting that that's the amount of gold that came to him? Now look, I'm not trying to say that this tells us all this much about the Antichrist, except for this. Don't be surprised if the Antichrist is, like Solomon, a good man gone bad. We don't usually think of him that way, do we? Think about all the movies about the Antichrist, The Omen. The kid born with 666 on his forehead. He's like murdering his classmates, because he's the embodiment of pure evil ever since he came out of the womb. Honestly, I don't think so. I think it's much more likely that the Antichrist appear as a good man who perhaps imperceptibly to the world, but true before God, he's a good man who's gone bad. That was Solomon. Nobody can deny that Solomon was a good man earlier in his life. That's pretty good, that Solomon would just be the epitome of man, the high point of man. But this leads us into something, that's a great segue, Deborah. Think about the last thing, the powerful contrast there is to his father, King David. David was never as rich as Solomon. David had never as much peace as Solomon. David didn't have as much influence as Solomon. David didn't have the glory of building the temple like Solomon did. On and on and on. Nevertheless, how does the Bible regard the two men? It says this. Solomon may have been the high point, the epitome of man in all of his accomplishments. But David was like the epitome of a man of God. And that's the difference. Now, this is what's fascinating about it. If you were to do just a very objective analysis comparing the reign of David and the reign of Solomon, who had a greater reign, David or Solomon? Who? Somebody say it clearly. Solomon. Why? At peace, more successful.
The world saw more. It was more.
Yeah, more wealthy. How about this? He didn't have a civil war where his own son tried to murder him. That kind of puts a black mark on the reign, you know. He didn't commit adultery with a woman and murder his husband, her husband. You know, on and on. In some ways, not in every way, I don't want to exaggerate this, in some ways, the reign of David was a mess. But you know what? David shines like a star in God's firmament. And Solomon? Does the New Testament refer to Solomon?
Yes.
Where? How? How does the New Testament refer to Solomon?
Jesus is talking about not worrying and how Solomon and all his...
Okay, so what does he say? Do you remember what he says?
He says even the flowers
He says, look at the flowers of the field. What does he say?
they're taken care of just as...
Yeah, here's the line. Not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed as one of these. That's exactly it, right? Now think about that. Jesus speaks of Solomon right there. And it's like a slap at Solomon. Look at this flower. Not even Solomon was as beautiful as this flower. Isn't that something? I mean, he's not only extolling the beauty of God's creation, but it's a little slap at Solomon. Yeah, nice try, Solomon. You had all this money and your personal assistants and your whole, valet team or whatever dressing you every morning, and you still didn't look as good as a wildflower. Okay, that's one thing. One other place where Solomon's mentioned in the New Testament. Anybody got it? I see Deborah doing a search right now. Jesus makes the comparison once, and to tell you the truth, I can't remember the context. He refers to himself, and he calls himself one greater than Solomon is among you. The rare times Solomon is mentioned in the New Testament, it's putting him down. It's like, yeah, he looked great, but not as good as a wildflower. Yeah, Solomon's great, but not as great as Jesus. When David appears in the Old and the New Testament, he's praised, he's praised, he's praised. For a lot of different reasons, but one reason is David finished well when Solomon did not. So it's just a very powerful contrast to his father, King David. Even though outwardly there was a lot remarkable about the reign of Solomon, but inwardly, spiritually, not so great. Or at least, especially in the way that it ended. All right, let's go on. How does the book of 1 Kings advance God's plan of redemption? Well, let me tell you two ways that I thought of. Number one, we see in the book of 1 Kings the preserving of the line of King David, which will eventually result in the Messiah, and preserving it through ungodliness. Solomon is sacrificing to idols at the end of his life. The kings that came after Solomon for the kingdom of Judah were sometimes foolish and wicked men, yet God held it together so that it could bring forth the Messiah. This is a big deal. Number two, he worked through the prophets, typified by Elijah, to preserve a remnant in Israel. You know, there's a great big, good afternoon. There's a great big name that we haven't even mentioned in the book of 1 Kings, Elijah. Elijah is the dominant figure of the second half of 1 Kings. So Solomon's the dominant figure of the first half, but Elijah is the dominant figure of the second half. I think one of the reasons I haven't talked about Elijah much, and that I won't talk about him, because we just finished a series on Sunday mornings talking all about Elijah. We talked about Elijah a lot, but Elijah is the dominant figure of the second half of this book of 1 Kings. Next, all right, let's talk about our charts, go through our chart work right here. You ready for this? First of all, the book of 1 Kings is not among the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the law. It is not one of the poetical books. It is not one of the prophetic books, either major or minor. It is one of the historical books of the Old Testament, and it lies in between 2 Samuel and 2 Kings, the book of 1 Kings. Secondly, if you want to take a look at it in its... Wow, I thought I'd have that out of order. Did I? Oh yeah, okay. I double pressed. The book of 1 Kings, first of all, its focus in the first 11 chapters is the United Kingdom under who? and David. Very good. David just for one chapter, but he's still in there. David and Solomon for the united kingdom there, and then in the divided kingdom beginning with Rehoboam. Okay? Secondly, I forgot to upload this chart to the thing. Kurt, remind me to do that. Remind me to upload the charts and the maps to the website tonight, because I want you guys to have access to these charts. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is the topic of 1 Kings. In the first half, you have Solomon, and the theme is the kingdom in tranquility, in peace. But then in the second half, you have many kings, not just Solomon, and the kingdoms are in turmoil. Okay, so really, in some ways, you can divide. The book of 1 Kings has how many chapters? 22. The break is at chapter 11, right? First 11 are all about Solomon. The second 11 are all about the variety of kings. Next, we have the reference and the division. You have the first 2 chapters of Solomon being established. Then you have 6 chapters of the rise of Solomon. And then you have 2 or 3 chapters of the decline of Solomon. Then in here, you have the division of the kingdom in the first few chapters going into the second half. Then you have the reigns of various kings. And then finally, you have a focus on the reign of Ahab with Elijah. Okay? That's how it flows with the reference through to the end. Okay, are we good? No questions? Everybody likes the chart. Thank you to the Open Bible people for the charts. The time, Solomon's reign in the first half is about 40 years. The divided kingdom, it's about 90 years. Some people say 100 years, but somewhere around there, 90 to 100 years. Okay, next. Here's where that 130, 140 years comes in. Okay? It comes in not in the section of the book of Genesis, chapter 11, not in the section of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not in the section where they were in bondage in Egypt, not in the section of the book of Judges, not in the section of the reign of Saul, but the very end of David's reign, okay, and the beginning of the divided kingdom. Do you catch the graphic that indicates the divided kingdom? The north Israel and the south Judah. Do we have that on the timeline? Does everybody see that? Okay, what I want you to notice here is how come the timeline for the northern kingdom of Israel is so much shorter than the timeline for the southern kingdom of Judah. Can anybody explain that? That's right. The northern kingdom of Israel fell into captivity, about 150 years earlier than the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay? Any questions on this? Next. Here you have the location, the geography. The location here describes, first of all, in the first 11 chapters, Jerusalem, which being the capital of the United Kingdom. Okay? But now you have 2 centers in the divided kingdom. You have Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, and you have Jerusalem, which was the capital of Judah. Does everybody get the divided kingdom business? Okay? Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about geography. This is David's kingdom at the time of his death. Now, it's not that David was directly king over all this territory, but he had influence over all this territory. And again, what's this river right here? The Euphrates River. So he would have had influence to the north as far as that. These 2 areas here, who lived here? Does anybody remember? Who lived here? The Phoenicians. Okay, you have the Phoenicians with the cities of Tyre and Sidon, and you have the Philistines living there. Okay, is everybody clear on that? Now let's take a look at this map. Here is the area of influence under Solomon. Pretty much the same thing. Pretty much the same thing. I'll put these on the website as well. Okay, pretty much the same thing. But this is what I want you to understand, and this is what I kind of like about this chart. First of all, the Israelite kingdom pretty much absorbed the Phoenician kingdom in these days. Secondly, this area right here, this is the Israelite kingdom. This is the area of Israelite influence. So the leaders and the kings of these peoples, they would have been subject kings to Solomon. They would have had to pay him tribute, which is like tax money. They would have been under his dominion. So Solomon wasn't actually crowned king over these areas, but these kings were in submission to Solomon. Does everybody get that picture? And the Philistines still had their thing going on right here, even in Solomon's day. Okay? All the way up to the Euphrates River again. Okay? No questions? Take a look at another map. I kind of liked this map because it shows you these are the boundaries of Israel today. The red outline. Okay? So this is Solomon's kingdom. Okay, now again, we're not talking about his area of influence. We're talking about the kingdom of Solomon, okay, not his area of influence. Rory, yes?
On Chuck's sermon, he was talking about how Solomon had two navies in like the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes.
Why was it all the way over in the Persian Gulf? Why not use like the Red Sea outlet?
Well, that's what it would have been.
Oh.
The Red Sea outlet would have connected to the Mediterranean, or the Persian Gulf. Yeah, that's exactly what he means.
Okay, because on the map prior it had like Persian Gulf up over.
Yeah, but it extends into the Red Sea.
Okay.
Yeah, it gives access by the Red Sea. Exactly so. Okay, so here you have the outline of Israel today, and you see in a lot of ways Solomon's kingdom fits the outline of pretty much what Israel is today, approximately so. But notice this is the divided kingdom with Israel in the north, okay, and Judea or Judah in the south. I'll give another map that kind of shows the difference between the divided kingdom. That's this right here. Okay, here you have Israel, the northern kingdom, indicated by the, what color is that? Khaki. Man, that's great. You're good. That's khaki, okay? By the khaki color right there. That's the northern kingdom right there. And then this is the southern kingdom indicated by the color. That's not green. Goldenrod? Lime? Chartreuse? I don't even know what chartreuse is, but is that what chartreuse is? Okay, whatever. Okay, so Judah. Now, what I want you to understand is basically, there are 10 tribes up here, and there are 2 tribes down here. Now, what I kind of want you to see is it's a little bit funny how we talk about there being 2 tribes here. Can anybody count? Raise your hand if you can count in this room. Okay, count with me and read it out, okay, when I put the marker on it. Well, no, read it. And that's? How many tribes were in the southern kingdom?
2.
So which tribes were they?
Judah and Benjamin.
Judah and Benjamin. What about Simeon? Why are you dissing Simeon? What happened to him? Exactly. Simeon was absorbed into Judah, sort of lost his tribal identity into Judah. So technically, you could say that there were 10 tribes, or 3 tribes to the south, but Simeon was absorbed into Judah. So here you have this up here, the 10. Do we have 10 up here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But Dan has counted twice, so that's 10. Okay, any questions about this? The approximate division between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom? I want you to get the idea of the geography in mind. Okay?
Actually, there's only 9 because Manasseh's counted twice too.
Oh, that's right. Manasseh's counted twice too. Then I don't know where a mystery tribe is.
Is it Benjamin?
Well, Levi, right?
Simeon's down south.
Simeon's there.
So you got 3 and 9.
Okay, well, he's not up top, so he's on the south.
Was Benjamin always part of this southern, or did it kind of bobble between?
You know, it might have bobbled between the two because he was right on the border, as Jerusalem was. So that's a good question. That's worth kind of investigating. Benjamin might have been on the bubble. Okay, next slide. Oh, here's a chart. I thought that might be helpful to you. I'll put this up on the website as well. Dynasties of the northern kingdom. Now, forget about this chart just for a moment. Let's talk about the dynasties of the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom called? Judah. What? Judea or Judah. You could say either one. It's fine. How many dynasties ruled over the southern kingdom? One? Two? Oh, no, that's good. Okay, since the divided kingdom. What were the two that she was thinking of? No. Saul and David. That was very good. Okay, but since the days of the divided kingdom, how many dynasties ruled over the southern kingdom? One. The house of? David. Okay, that's it. Over the northern kingdom, oy vey, what a mess. What a mess. It begins with Jeroboam. Jeroboam. How many years did the dynasty of Jeroboam last? How long is that for a dynasty? Not very long. Okay, not very long. So you have Jeroboam, chosen by the people, and then you have Nadab. He inherited his throne. Okay, inherited his throne. Who did he inherit it from? Jeroboam. Okay, collectively together, 22 years. Now, this is what I want you to notice. How many of those 22 years belong to Jeroboam? About 20. How many of the years belong to Nadab? 2. Okay, so then you have the dynasty of Baasha. How did Baasha take the throne? He assassinated Nadab of the dynasty of Jeroboam. How long did his dynasty last? 24 years, and he gave it off to his son who inherited it. How long did his kingdom last? 1 or 2 years. Isn't that gnarly? I mean, think about that. Basically, what you have in these first 2 dynasties, you have a strong man who takes control, but he doesn't have enough strength to establish the kingdom enough to pass it on to his son, because their sons get wiped out pretty quick. That's what you have in the first 2 dynasties. Then you have the next dynasty, the third dynasty, the dynasty of Zimri. How long did that last? It lasted a week. A week. That's how long the mighty dynasty of Zimri. You see, I wish you guys would get a little more colorful in the way that you speak. When you speak of dismissing something in today's language or something, you should say, man, that's like the dynasty of Zimri. You could coin a new thing. It could become popular. You guys could be trendsetters. Everybody say, man, that started back with the guys at Generation Bible College in Santa Barbara. Man, that's like the dynasty of Zimri.
Only Bible college students would get it.
That's right. Well, it's all right, though. You would get it, though. Okay, assassinated. Now, then you have the dynasty of Omri. Now, this is what I want to point out about the dynasty of Omri. How long did that reign? 44 years, which in comparison was a pretty good run. And Omri was politically and militarily a good king. So was Ahab. Here, for the first time, you have a successful transition from this king to this king, from Ahab to Ahaziah to Jehoram. And by the end of this, we're at the end of 1 Kings. We'll pick it up with 2 Kings. But I just want you to get a feel of the northern kingdom of Israel, how the dynasties, how it's chaos and ungodliness. All right, in the southern kingdom of Judah, how many dynasties? How many good kings? Give me a guess. Because I don't know if I can tell you for sure. 2? Who are the good kings?
It was Asa and
Josiah. And there were several who were almost good, pretty good. I think 2 is, you guys are being kind of rough when you say 2. Okay? But, okay, let's just say this. It was a mixed bag. Maybe 50-50. Okay? How many good kings were there in the northern kingdom? 0. Isn't that awesome? Awesome in a bad way. 0 good kings in the northern kingdom. All right, next. Leading characters in 1 Kings. Well, you can't forget David. David passes off the throne in the book of 1 Kings, passes it off to Solomon. There's a little bit of a ruckus because one of David's other sons tried to take the throne, but that ends up living very short life, and Solomon is established as the king over the united kingdom of Israel. Then you have Solomon, but we've talked a lot about Solomon already. Sorry to turn my back to the camera. Solomon, we talked a lot about him already. I don't think we need to talk much more about him. Rehoboam. Rehoboam. What a character. To me, there's a great tragedy in Rehoboam, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon that took the throne. Then Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a man who started out as the captain under Solomon in Solomon's army. And Solomon ticked him off. Solomon was not good to Jeroboam, but he didn't succeed in killing Jeroboam. Therefore, Jeroboam just went off and hid, and when Solomon died, he made the play to take the allegiance of the 10 tribes. Now, what did Jeroboam do? Because, let's go back in our maps. Shall we check this out? Go back. Whoops, wrong way. Okay. Solomon built a temple. Rory, I want you to do the laser pointer right here. Solomon built a temple, and Rory, show everybody where Solomon built the temple on the map of Israel. Where was that? Okay, and what are you pointing at? Jerusalem. Okay? Now, in which kingdom, northern or southern, is Jerusalem? Southern. So if you are, thank you very much. Let's hear it for Rory and his work with the laser pointer. If you are Jeroboam and reigning over this, do you actually want somebody to go all the way to Jerusalem and go to those traitor Judahites to worship at the temple? No, you don't want them doing that. So what does Jeroboam do? He establishes 2 rival centers of worship, one of them in Samaria. Isn't Samaria around here somewhere? One of them in Samaria, and the other one in up here. And basically, he says to the people of Israel, it's too much work for you to go to Jerusalem. Don't go there. You just stay and worship at the golden calves, because this is the God that brought you up out of Egypt. And you don't have to go all that way to Jerusalem. Just worship at these rival places. And that's what he did. Now, one of the coolest things, and did you guys know that in just a few weeks I'm going to go to Israel? Is anybody in this room going to Israel with me? No? Okay. Sad for you guys. Has anybody in this room been to Israel with me? Yeah. Okay. What's amazing about going to the place of Dan, the city of Dan?
It's just icky and creepy and
Bad vibes. But what's there?
the altar thing.
If you go to the biblical city of Dan, you'll see at the ruins there the exact spot in the ruins of the altar that Jeroboam built at Dan, and where they set up the golden calf for it to be worshipped and sacrificed unto. It is creepy, but it's amazing. You see the place where he actually did this. So that Jeroboam becomes kind of a model of unfaithfulness as a king. Many times later in the book of 1 Kings or in 2 Kings or in Chronicles, they'll say he sinned like the sin of Jeroboam. So he kind of becomes a measuring stick for sin. Then you have Ahab. Ahab's his own mess, isn't he? The son of Omri, a wicked man, but not only a wicked man, a weak man. What made him a weak man? He was a weak man because he seemed to be overwhelmed by his wife, Jezebel. Jezebel, who was a Phoenician princess who came and was the very wicked queen over Israel, combined with her husband, the king Ahab. And then in the midst of those very dark times, you have Elijah. Now, here's kind of what you have. Isn't it interesting that the prophets in their great prophetic office did not emerge in the southern kingdom of Judah? Because it was as if God said, I can still work through the kings in the southern kingdom of Judah. In the northern kingdom of Israel, the kings are lost to me. I've got to raise up another way to reach them. I'm going to reach them through the prophets. And that's why God sent Elijah as this first great prophet. Next. Let's just kind of walk through the major events of the book of 1 Kings. First, we have David declining and appointing Solomon as a successor, and then David dies. That's in 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2. I hope you guys aren't busily writing your chapter summaries as I do this right now. That would be wrong. Rory, yes?
Why did Nathan have Bathsheba go into David and talk to him about Absalom kind of becoming king, and then Nathan came in after? You know that whole scene with like David who's like lying in bed and then.
Well, they were trying to take advantage of David and his declining strength and energy. And they were trying to do an end around and put this other guy, what was his name? Ishbosheth?
Yeah.
Ishbosheth on the throne instead of Solomon.
Right. So why did Nathan just go to David and say, "Hey, this is what's happening"?
Well, I don't really know. I don't really know why why Nathan seems to get played for a fool there. I don't exactly know. I wonder, okay, who was it that confronted David about his adultery with Bathsheba? Maybe, this is just speculation, I don't know. Maybe Nathan was offended that the son of Bathsheba was going to be put on the throne. And he was happy to see somebody else on the throne. Or was it Nathan that was assisting David in regard to Solomon? Yeah. I'm a little confused.
Yeah, it's where
that's right.
but Nathan tells Bathsheba, "You go in and tell David this is going on with Ishbosheth, and we're going to put you in."
Oh, they're just trying to figure out the most effective way to put it to David. I don't think there's anything more than just, let's try to be as persuasive as possible, especially because he's starting to lose it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything more to it than that. Secondly, Solomon asks for and receives wisdom to rule. That's in 1 Kings chapter 3, which is a remarkable thing. God offers Solomon anything. And what does Solomon ask for? Wisdom to rule over the people of Israel. Now, can I just ask you something? Did Solomon ask for the best thing he could have asked for? No, let me back it up with a question. Did Solomon ask for a good thing? Yes, and the scriptures say so. Solomon asked for a good thing. You could even say that Solomon asked for a great thing. Okay, here's a follow-up question. Did Solomon ask for the best thing he could have asked for? What do you think Solomon could have asked for if that would have been the best thing?
A good relationship with the Lord.
You remember where it says in the Psalms, "One thing have I desired of the Lord, and that will I seek after, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." Solomon asked for a good thing, no doubt about it, and the scriptures praise him for it. But if there was one thing greater that Solomon could have asked for, Solomon could have said, "Lord, I just want you." And you get the feeling that that's what David would have asked for. I just want you. So it's kind of interesting there. Solomon did not ask for a bad thing, but for a good thing. But it's kind of hard to say that he asked for the best thing. Then over in 1 Kings chapter 4, you have examples of Solomon's administration and wise rule over Israel. It's in chapter 4 that you have the split the baby in two occasion, this kind of tremendous example of Solomon's great wisdom. Then next, you have Solomon building the temple. Chapters 5 through 8 is all about him building the temple. I just want you to remember when you do that, and we're going to see this in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, he built the temple with David's stuff. Okay. Then next, Solomon sins, his decline, and his death. That's in 1 Kings chapters 9, 10, and 11. It's gnarly. It's a bad story right there. 9, 10, and 11. Moving on, you have the foolish Rehoboam and the revolt of the 10 northern tribes. Why did the tribes revolt from Rehoboam?
They wanted less work.
Less work and lower taxes.
And he was given bad advice.
Who gave him the bad advice? His young advisors. Yeah, you see, he inherited a great set of advisors from Solomon. And this is what the advisors said to Rehoboam. They said, "Man, look, your father was a great man and he built amazing stuff in Israel, but let's face it, he worked the people like dogs and he took a lot of taxes from them. Why don't you show him, hey, I'm going to work you less and I'm going to lower your taxes. It'll make you happy. It'll be a good break after my dad." Okay? And that's what his older advisors said to him. What did his younger advisors say? They said, you tell those people, you thought my dad was a tough guy? I'm even worse. I'm your worst nightmare. Give me more money and get back to work and work even harder. And that's when the 10 northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, said, out of here. Check, please. We're done with it. We're done with this. And it just shows how foolish Rehoboam was to do what he did. So that was pretty telling there, Rehoboam's. So there's the revolt of the 10 northern tribes. Then you have Jeroboam leading the 10 northern tribes into their idolatry, the establishment of Jeroboam's kingdom. I'll tell you this. I wish I would have highlighted the verse, but it's in there. God made a promise to Jeroboam very similar that he made to David. God made the promise to Jeroboam, if you're faithful to me, and if you obey me, and if you serve me all the days of your life, I'll establish your dynasty in Israel like David's dynasty in Judea, in Judah. But Jeroboam didn't keep his end of the bargain at all. And so his dynasty only lasted 22 years. Then you have Rehoboam from gold to bronze. Oh, this is one of the most tragic sections in 1 Kings. Earlier in the book of 1 Kings, it describes the glory of Solomon's kingdom. Is he had this greatest palace of the forest. And they called it the palace of the forest because even though it was in Jerusalem, there was so much cedar wood in it that when you walked in, you felt like you were in the forest. So it's this amazing, you can just imagine, probably the most ultimate house that had ever been built in Jerusalem. And in this one notable room, Solomon hung, I don't know how many it was 22, 44, something like that, a gang of them, all these golden shields. And can you imagine walking into a dude's house and there he's just got dozens of shields beautifully engraved, beautifully shaped and hammered out of pure gold. It's just like the ultimate thing of strength and opulence and all this. It's amazing. Okay, that was Solomon. Look at Rehoboam. Oh, wait. Oh, I didn't put that one in there. Okay, let's go back to this. I'm going to read this to you. 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 21 through that. Let me go to this. Okay, verse 21 through 28. And Rehoboam the son of Solomon reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years when he became king. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city where the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. Now Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they committed, more than all their fathers had done. They also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. And they were also perverted persons in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. Man, you read that and just go, this was David's kingdom? This was the kingdom of the great King David? And there's nothing but idolatry and immorality and perversion throughout the whole kingdom? You just shake your head and you go, it went from the glory of David to the disgusting reign of Rehoboam so quickly. Now continuing on, verse 25. It happened in the 5th year of Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, and he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and he took away everything. He took away all the gold shields which Solomon had made. All those gold shields. Egyptian king comes and he says, thank you very much. Those will look great in my house. Thank you, I appreciate it. So check it out here. Verse 27. Then King Rehoboam made bronze shields in their place and committed them to the heads of the captains of the guard who guarded the doorway of the king's house. And whenever the king entered the house of the Lord, the guards carried them and brought them back into the guard room. Okay, notice this. He goes from gold to bronze in just a few years. And they are so lacking security in the kingdom of Judah that they have to hide the shields in a guard room, and they bring them out only when the king's going to walk through the room. What a contrast. From gold to bronze, and you can't even protect the bronze in just a few years. That shows how quickly a culture and a society can decline. And that was the tragedy of falling from gold to bronze with Rehoboam. Next, you've got two kings in Judah that come up in chapter 15, Abijam and Asa. And then you've got 5 kings in Israel. You've got Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, and Omri. That's chapters 15 and 16. Then you have the reign of Ahab in Israel, starting at chapter 16 and going all the way to chapter 22. Then you have Elijah the drought and the widow's son in 1 Kings 17. You have Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. That's chapter 18. You have Ahab's wars with Syria. That's chapter 20. Ahab and Jezebel murder Naboth. That's 21. And then you have the death of Ahab in 22. The reign of Jehoshaphat in Judah in 22, and the reign of Ahaziah in Israel, chapter 22. Think about it. You got about 130, 140 years. You begin with David, the greatest king of Israel. You end with losers like Jehoshaphat and Ahaziah. It's tragic. A tragic, tragic end. That's how you go in the book of 1 Kings. We've got a few more things to say. Any questions here about the general timeline? Do you sense the decline in it all? Yes, Kenny.
Do you think Judah lasted longer before they were captured and enslaved because of Asa?
Well, partially. I'd say more so because of Josiah than anybody else. But yeah, but because they did. They got right with God, at least somewhat, for sure. For sure. Other comments here? All right, a few more slides. Next, where does Jesus appear in the book of 1 Kings? Well, I could maybe give several more examples, but let's just stick with these. Number one, we see here Solomon as a foreshadow of Jesus. If you take Solomon in the first 10 chapters, it's pretty awesome. Solomon, especially in the first 8. But even if you go 9 and 10, that's okay. Don't look at 11. 11 is not Solomon as a foreshadowing of Jesus. But the first 8 chapters for sure, 9 and 10 maybe. Solomon at his height is a beautiful foreshadowing of Jesus. Secondly, you have Jesus being the one greater than Solomon. And that's in that passage from the Sermon on the Mount, and then also where Jesus himself said, "Here I am, I'm greater than Solomon." So that's the other example that we have. Next, what if 1 Kings was not in the Bible? Well, I think you could ask the question, how greatly could God bless Israel under the Old Covenant? What's the answer to that question? How greatly could God bless Israel under the Old Covenant? As great as Solomon's reign. As great as the height of Solomon's reign. That's how great it could be. Secondly, you can answer the question, can wise men sin stupidly? And the answer to the question is, yes, Solomon shows you. And then you have the thing, how will God preserve a remnant in wicked days? Well, there may be many answers to that question, but one of them is to send men like Elijah to go and to lead them and to minister to them and to set the tone for them. That's how God preserved a remnant in those very wicked days. Okay. Problem passages in the book of 1 Kings. We've only got a few of them, so we'll deal with them and then wrap up here for the evening. First of all, in light of his dealings with Bathsheba and her husband Uriah, how could David be regarded by the Lord as a servant whose heart was perfect before him? As it mentions in those passages, 1 Kings 11:4, 15:3, and then Acts 13:22. Well, the basis of David's perfect or loyal heart to God was not upon sinless perfection, but on general faithfulness and willingness to repent. Here you have this marvelous thing in David, that even though he was a sinner, He was a sinner who nevertheless trusted in God and ended well in that respect. So that's one of the plain and remarkable things there. Next, was Elijah's prediction of the dogs licking up Ahab's blood at Jezreel really fulfilled by the pool of Samaria? Oh, this is a difficult one. This is a difficult one. In 1 Kings chapter 21, Elijah says to Ahab, they're going to lick up your blood at the pool of Samaria. At the pool of Samaria. So what we find is that in 1 Kings chapter 22, 37, 38, Ahab dies not at Samaria but at Jezreel. And they wash out his chariot and the dogs lick up the blood. Say, well, wait a minute here. How does this happen? I thought it was at the pool of Samaria, and we're nowhere near Samaria. Couple solutions. Number one, it could be that perhaps Naboth was murdered in Samaria. And the pool of Samaria was the same place where the blood came. Perhaps that was the case. I don't think that's a solution, but it's a possibility. Here's the better possibility. In Jezreel, they had a place called the Pool of Samaria. Now, when you and I hear the Pool of Samaria, logically, our first reaction is to say, oh, that's a pool in the city of Samaria. But couldn't you have a pool titled the Pool of Samaria in another city? Yeah. Especially if it's the royal pool and the pool is identified by the royal city. So let's just say the federal government or, the President of the United States had a pool in Santa Barbara, and they called it the Pool of Washington, because it's connected with the city. That is the more likely situation, that there was a place in Jezreel called the Pool of Samaria.